As we look tonight to the US and NATO's pivot to Asia, I think it's important to put this in the context of US imperialism abroad. Over 80 military bases in countries around the world, invasions of other countries, violations of airspace, military involvement that's in direct violation of international law has become a matter of course for the US military and considered to just be the way things are. And I think when we look into the context of that, looking back historically, it's kind of what the US has been based on. Colonel Wright is joining us from Hawaii, which is one of the US colonies in the Pacific, used like every US colony as a military base. Today, the US is also celebrating for the first time Juneteenth. The Juneteenth holiday commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and read a federal order abolishing the institution of slavery in the state. Since that day, Americans have observed and celebrated Juneteenth as Emancipation Day, a day of freedom. And I think when we're looking into what's happening now with U.S. imperialism abroad and some of the military involvement in places like Somalia and places like Yemen and in many other places around the world, I think it's important to put it in that context, that this is a nation that was founded on a genocide of Native people, and enslavement of African people forced here against their will and forced into slavery for many, many generations. So in that context, I want to welcome Ann Wright. Ann Wright has a amazing history, starting with 13 years in the U.S. Army and 16 years in the Army Reserves, where she made it to the rank of colonel. And then in the Foreign Service, she was a deputy ambassador in Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Afghanistan, Mongolia, and also helped in the evacuation of people from Sierra Leone during the civil war then that was going on there. And she was on the first State Department team to go to Afghanistan and help reopen the embassy there in December 2001. And she also had overseas assignments in Somalia, Kyrgyzstan, Grenada, Micronesia, and Nicaragua. On the eve of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, Colonel Wright cabled a letter of resignation to Secretary of State Colin Powell, stating that without the authorization of the UN Security Council, the invasion and occupation of Iraq would be a violation of international law. She was one of only 3 people who resigned from the US government in opposition to the Iraq War. Well, since then, she has become a mainstay in the peace movement in the United States, writing, speaking out for peace, picketing at the U.S. prison at Guantanamo, Cuba, where we know many, many people have been tortured. Many innocent people have been held for many, many years. She traveled to Iran as a citizen diplomat and has also been involved in civil disobedience and been arrested for peaceful, nonviolent protests, including against U.S. drone bases. She traveled to Gaza as part of the flotillas and the attempt to break the illegal Israeli blockade that is starving the people of Gaza since 2007. She has been to Gaza in 2009, 2011, 2012, and was part of the flotillas in 2010 and 2011 and beyond. And she has also traveled to Jeju Island in South Korea to oppose the construction of a U.S. naval base there and spoke out against the effort to remove the anti-war article in Japan's constitution that was put in place at the end of World War II. And her expertise in the Western Pacific is the basis of today's event. And with that context and that background, I am very happy to welcome Colonel Ann Wright.
As you mentioned, I am a resident. I'm a colonial settler in the occupied lands of the Hawaiian people. And from those occupied lands, unfortunately, come huge military forces And I'll be speaking about a lot of those military forces that come out of Hawaii and other areas that the U.S. has colonized, including Guam and the Northern Marianas, and the military bases that we have in countries throughout the Asia Pacific region. You know, we are all very concerned about what's going on in Europe now with the war between Russia and Ukraine. And it's a brutal, brutal war where we're seeing daily the destruction, the power of weapons to kill, maim, destroy cities. What we're seeing there certainly should remind us, as 20 years ago, the U.S. destruction of many cities in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in Yemen, more recently in Syria. The U.S. is a warmongering country, and it is hand in hand with another warmongering organization that we've mentioned in the title of this talk about NATO, and NATO pivoting, as well as the United States, from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to one could call it the Pacific Treaty Organization, with all of the military maneuvers that are going on in hand in hand with the United States and with the partners, not actually members of NATO yet, but four partners in the Pacific region, the Asian Pacific, that are cooperating hand in hand with NATO. NATO forces that are in the Pacific certainly increase the tensions that we have in this Pacific region. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those tensions are. First, I'd just like to mention to you, I live in Hawaii, and the Indo-Pacific Command for the U.S. military is located there. And it covers half of the circumference of the world. It's the largest geographic U.S. military command, and it goes, as the name indicates, it goes through the Pacific all the way to India now. And there are something like 70 U.S. military bases that are just in Japan. There are 30 or 40 some odd that are in Korea. We have military bases that are on the island of Guam, a territory of the United States, and areas in the Northern Marianas. We'll go into a little more detail on all this, but it's a huge military maneuver. In Hawaii, we have 4 major military bases on the island of Oahu, where I live, including Pearl Harbor, the naval base there that has leaked its jet fuel that was only 100 feet above the aquifer of the drinking water aquifer of the city of Honolulu. 80-year-old massive 20-story tanks that were holding a total of 250 million gallons of jet fuel leaked and into that aquifer, poisoning the water for 93,000 people, many of whom lived on military bases. So there's a lot of rabble-rousing that's going on right now, as you can well imagine, in Hawaii, about safety, security, human security, not national security being human security. And like drinking water is a really important thing. We look at the rest, the hot spots in Asia and the Pacific. This is a kind of an overall view map, but I'll go into detail of some of the hot spots before we talk about what the U.S. and NATO are doing, which are increasing the tensions here. A lot of times we don't really look at maps very well. And when you look at this one, where South Korea, North Korea, and right across, right here is Beijing. Look how close everything is. Vladivostok, the largest city in eastern Russia, is right here. Then you've got Tokyo right over here, Osaka, another huge major city. the hotspot of North Korea, we know of the potential, the nuclear weapons that North Korea has tested, 6 of them. There's been a hiatus of the testing of nuclear weapons, and until just recently, the testing of ballistic missiles. That all, the cessation of those happened when, remarkably, President Trump, after calling Kim Jong-un, Rocket Man and all of these derogatory terms, all of a sudden had meetings with him, 3 meetings, where we were very, very hopeful that there might be some movement toward the end of the longest war. Right now, there's just an armistice in effect, and our many groups, Korea Peace Now groups, and Veterans for Peace, of what I'm a part of, the Korea Peace campaign, all hoping that we could get some sort of peace agreement, if not even a treaty, that would help somewhat reassure the government of North Korea that the United States was not going to invade it, even though our history of what the United States has done to countries does not really give one, many countries, any great sense of trust in the United States, since we do seem to invade and occupy at will. However, one would hope that a true, honest peace treaty that is such that the North Koreans could say, well, we think the United States is not going to invade us, and then allow them to develop economically and help their own people who are living very tough lives. I was in North Korea in 2015 with Women Across the DMZ. We were only there for 5 days, but we certainly got a feel of what was happening in the country. The United States has been, after the North Koreans started testing ballistic missiles again, the United States started sending aircraft carriers up and around the Korean Peninsula, 2 of them, just in the last couple of months. And when an aircraft carrier goes anywhere, it takes with it usually at least 10 ships and submarines with it. So there were a lot of U.S. military ships that were up in that area, in that hot spot. If you go down further along the coast of China, the area of Shanghai, further south down to Taiwan, the Straits of Taiwan that you see between the island of Taiwan and China, that's been the site of a lot of U.S. naval presence in what they call freedom of the seas navigation, where the United States says that we will keep naval vessels going in through any sort of waters just to make sure that countries that may be claiming areas that we're confronting them on it. The United States is confronting, and the U.S. has had a one China policy where the U.S. does not diplomatically recognize Taiwan, but we have ties to Taiwan, huge economic ties to Taiwan and military ties to Taiwan. In fact, the United States sells a large number of weapons. Since 2010, we've sold $30 billion worth of military weapons to Taiwan. And under the Biden administration, they've already sold $2 billion worth, to include short-range rockets and howitzers. And we do have military trainers that are in there. The U.S. has, starting under the Trump administration, started sending the highest level diplomats. Even though we don't have a diplomatic mission there, we've been sending high-level diplomats, essentially to poke a finger in the eye of the People's Republic of China. And U.S. Congress delegations have gone in. And each time a congressional delegation or a high-level U.S. government official goes in, the Chinese respond, and they respond with an armada of aircraft coming across the straits of the Taiwan Straits. It's only about 22 miles. They start sending jet aircraft right to the air defense zone of Taiwan to say, we know what you're doing. We don't like it. It angers them very, very much. The potential for some accident to happen during these, either the United States that's sending ships through the Taiwan Straits, or the Chinese that are sending aircraft right across to the western border of Taiwan, is very high. We go down further. Another hot spot that we have is the South China Sea, where the Chinese government has built small military bases on many of the contested islands that are in the South China Sea. China really only has one military base outside of China, and that's in Djibouti on the Horn of Africa. Now the United States, as Jenka said, that we have 800 military bases outside the United States. China has one in Djibouti, and then about 8 small islands or atolls have been filled with sand, and air landing strips have been placed there. And it's contentious because Vietnam says part of that's theirs. The Philippines say they own some of them. So, between the Spratly Islands, the Paracel Islands, and all these, it's the contested area through there. The United States continues to send its aircraft carriers and destroyers through this area, and submarines. And in fact, a submarine that was coming through one of these areas all of a sudden hit an unidentified or non-identified seamount and caused big destruction on that submarine. One could say, these are very dangerous things when you have a submarine that suddenly hits something and you don't know, is it another submarine? What is it? The potential for incidents to happen are huge. Another hot spot, and this is one that just occurred this last month in a place that nobody thought this was going to be a hot spot, the Solomon Islands. I mean, how in the world, why would that be out here in the middle, of very small island nations out here? Well, the Chinese decided that they were going to kind of take a page from the book of the United States, where the United States has military agreements, security agreements with all sorts of nation states, to include the Marshall Islands, where the U.S. tested nuclear weapons back in the 1940s and 50s, the Federated States of Micronesia, where I was actually assigned as a diplomat for 2 years. Palau over here, the U.S. has huge military agreements that the U.S. has the right to defend all of this area. Well, the Chinese took a page from that, and they went down to the Solomon Islands and said, we'd be glad to help you with your national security and with disaster relief and things like that. And would you like to sign a security agreement? And the government of the Marshall Islands said, yes, we would like to. Well, that caused great furor in Washington. How dare the Chinese be doing something like that? And so the U.S. had cared so little for the Solomon Islands that we didn't even have an embassy there. So that was the very first thing that happened. All of a sudden, a huge delegation from Washington flew out to the Solomon Islands to say, oh, we are going to construct our own embassy there now, and now you are very important to us. So this is a very interesting part of the confrontation, both militarily and diplomatically. This is another picture of that part of the ocean, which most of us really don't look at much at all. But there are all sorts of things to include down to the south, Darwin, where the United States has a rotation of 3,000 Marines that go in for a 6-month rotation. And this is a place where the United States is building jet fuel, what do you call them? Refinery, not refinery, but it's a storage area for jet fuel. Since they're now having to close down the big facility in Honolulu and at Pearl Harbor, they now have a contract here in Darwin that they'll build tanks that will hold 60 million gallons of fuel. And part of the strategy now is to move fuel that you need for war to move closer to the place you think you're going to have the war. And in fact, the United States calls China in its military security documents an enemy, which is very disturbing. When you look at the trade balances, I mean, we still trade with our enemy. The largest trading partner of Australia is China. And in fact, the Chinese company has the leasing rights for the harbor of Darwin, where the United States is building its jet fuel storage tanks. They have like a 90-year lease on that harbor. So one can kind of wonder, like, what have we really thought this out about who we're calling an enemy and why? When you look at the Chinese budget, military budget, it's like 1/10 of what the United States budget is. It's small compared to what the U.S. spends. And of course, remembering that the U.S. is spending more and more and more and more every year. The budget's not going down. It continues to go up, up, up. Another part that I'd like to focus on is military bases on the tiny territory of Guam and training areas in the Northern Marianas that are expanding. Little tiny Guam, which is just a little blip right down here, it has a huge air base. It has a naval base, a submarine base, and it's getting the newest marine base. The first time in 50 years the Marines have had a new base is going into the island of Guam. And here in Guam, you see at the naval base the boarding facilities for one of the nuclear submarines that comes in frequently there. The submarines are actually based out of the state of Washington. And when they submerge, they're gone for 4 or 5 months. And every now and then they'll pop into places like Guam. Guam also has the huge Anderson Air Base, and it has B-52 bombers. If you look over on the left of your screen, here are large bombers, and then in front you see little assassin drones, the Reaper drones that are now assigned in Guam. 6 Reaper drones have been recently assigned to Guam, and 6 have been assigned to Hawaii. Hawaii, out in the middle of nowhere, we're saying, well, what are these things doing there? We are so far from any landmass. Why do you have those planes there? Well, I think it's just a staging area for use on small islands that the United States is going to put folks on small islands to wait for enemy ships to come by. And then they'll have these drones, and they'll have other equipment there that can go after them. If you look to the screen on the right, here you see all of these B-52s that are lined up. This was done during the Trump administration after Trump had called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man, and Kim Jong-un responded with a couple of rockets and said that they were capable of reaching Guam. And so the U.S. flew in from B-52 bases in Missouri, in California, North Dakota, a huge number of B-52s as a show of force. Not only are those the things that are going on a day-to-day basis, but there is what's called the Rim of the Pacific Naval War Maneuvers, RIMPAC. RIMPAC happens every 2 years, and it's the largest naval exercise in the world. And this is just one photograph of the types of equipment that will be coming into the waters off Hawaii from June 29th through August 4th. We'll have 26 countries will be participating, 25,000 military personnel, 38 ships, 4 submarines, 170 aircraft, and 9 nations that will be doing ground maneuvers, amphibious maneuvers. And I want to call your attention to the logo of RIMPAC, the logo that has the aircraft. It has an aircraft carrier, it has a submarine, destroyer. You'll see this a little bit of graphic artwork done by some of our activists to show you another version of the RIMPAC logo in just a minute.